Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's lovely to see you here today. I am very excited to be joined by a guest teacher today. Bernadette Lack is joining us from Core and Floor. We're going to be talking a lot about pelvic floor work this morning, which is something I'm very interested in, having recently had a baby. You can hear her in the background. She's interested too, apparently. Let's not waste too much time. Let's jump right in. Bernadette, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your background, how you got into this work, what the work is that you do. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Epic. So thanks for having me. So people just call me B, it's easier. Basically, I am a midwife. I've got a Bachelor of Midwifery with honours that I've published, and my research has been in Aboriginal outcomes with midwifery group practice. And then I've got a master's in public health. So I have worked all around Australia. I've spent a lot of time in remote Aboriginal communities working. I've done a lot of caseload work and a lot of publicly funded home birth in Alice Springs and Melbourne. I've also spent a year as a midwifery educator on a tiny island in the Solomon Islands called Gizo. It was 5 kilometres in radius, and I thought that I knew how strong women were and how resilient babies were until I spent a year with just a Pinards and nothing else, and we didn't lose any mums, and the babies that did pass away were really early, 20, 24 weekers. So it was an incredible year that it felt like birth really slapped me in the face that year. It was like, this is how epic we are. And then I went from there straight into a really busy hospital in Melbourne, and it was really confronting and such a contrast. So I started a company called Core and Floor Restore, and the way I got into that was from my own experience. So I leaked urine as a 19-year-old. When I would sneeze. I've had chronic hay fever, and I'm really passionate about explaining that in our world, in our culture, we often have this misconception that birth ruins us. It doesn't make sense that something that we are designed to do that is completely physiological and we are perfectly made to do it would ruin us. And so I love sharing my story because majority of us will enter pregnancy with some type of pelvic floor dysfunction or core and pelvic floor dysfunction. It's just often that it's not been symptomatic, and so many women will experience symptoms like leakage or heaviness or dragging like prolapse or other issues like pain, pelvic girdle pain, back pain in pregnancy, and then the symptoms often become worse postpartum or they don't go away. And then so often I think birth gets the blame for it, when sometimes it's the case if we've made birth, if birth has had a lot of interventions in it, that can definitely be the case. But so for me, I leaked urine as a 19-year-old, and I now put that down to a childhood full of constipation. Constipation is one of the worst things that occurs to our pelvic floor because it's that constant, where's my little dinosaur? It's that constant straining and bearing down on all of that connective tissue and muscle. And so often we blame the muscles, but it's connective tissue is really the biggest player here. And most of us grow up hearing about muscles and bones. We learn about that in school, but we very rarely hear about connective tissue. And so if you don't know what it is, I like to explain it, and apologies if you have a spider phobia, that our body is full of web, like this beautiful intricate web, and our bones and muscles are embedded within that. There is an incredible YouTube video by Jill with a Gill Headley. He's a male, and he works really respectively and beautifully with Cardivars. And his video is called, thank you. His video is called, I don't think the A is in it, but you'll find him. The Fuzz Speech on YouTube. The Fuzz Speech. It's a 5-minute video. He's really eccentric, and he's just epic. But he explains connective tissue, and it shows what it looks like. I mean, it's on a dead person, but it shows what we look like when we wake up in the mornings and why we're stiff and sore. And so many of our issues around core and pelvic floor health is actually the connective tissue, but we think it's the muscle, and so we focus so much on contraction, which so much of our exercise culture is based on. That's why I'm so thankful for yoga, because it finally brought in that mentality of length and space and stretch. But so much of our culture around exercise and around women is to have hard bodies and hard muscles, and pregnancy and birth need space and length. So yeah. So I like to give
one of the things sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things I've been very aware of in my years of teaching yoga to pregnant women, or women even not pregnant, just preparing for birth, is that there's an equal problem of many women having an overly contracted pelvic floor as there is of women having a pelvic floor that's not toned enough. So yeah, I found that I was surprised to discover that when I first started teaching this work, that actually we're very, very focused on weak pelvic floor, but some women have overly toned or too much contraction. Is that correct, B?
I would argue that, or I would put forward, not arguing, I would put forward that the majority of women have hypertensive pelvic floors, especially given the last couple of years we've been through. And so all of these women think that their issues are, and it's because of the language we use around it as well, it's not a pelvic floor. It's not a floor. So when we see the pelvis and we look at it, we think of it that it's like this. But if you think about the angle of the dangle, it's actually a wall. And it's just one tiny part. The muscles are just one tiny part of a very supportive system. So the pelvis actually hangs out like this. And so it's not a floor at all. And then we use the language that our organs are falling out. They're not falling out, they're in incorrect alignment. And so because there is a hole there called the introitus of the vagina, we can see those organs, and sometimes they will be at the introitus and they will be external. They're still not falling out, they're just not in the right spot. So when our neck is sore and tight, we don't say that our brain is falling out because it's not in the right spot. And so it's all that language that we use. So women think their organs are falling out, and so they walk around like this, tensing and holding. Now, if tension is their issue, because like prolapse, for example, can very much be from tightness, especially around scar tissue, like episiotomy and tearing. And if you think about all the investigative procedures that women have now around endo and infertility, every time we enter a woman's body, there is the risk that adhesions will be there. Now, adhesions pull things out of position. And so prolapse can be very much a pulling down. You think about where tears are, they're at the perineum, and so you get this pulling down, and it just takes for one thing to be pulling or to not be strong enough to hold, and everything is out of whack. So the other thing, I know I'm just totally all over the place. I do this is how I tell stories. I'll come back to here, I promise. But the other thing that we really neglect in the way we approach pelvic floor health, and this is mostly because and I really value physiotherapy. I definitely see a place for it, but physiotherapy tends just to really focus on the muscles and only one muscle group. And in Australia, physiotherapy really holds control over pelvic floor health and wellness. It is starting to branch. So I've got a couple of really good friends who are osteopaths who have just been accredited and started to launch their training so that osteopaths can do internal work. I've just trained as a pelvic floor internal worker through people that teach body work. So it is starting to get out there. But the biggest thing about this is that it needs a really holistic approach. And a lot of it is emotional. So we tend, if our thoughts are tense, our bodies are tense. And so if you think about the last 2 years, if you think about how women typically as mothers spend a lot of time sympathetically dominated, right? So they're not, we're not meant to live in our sympathetic nervous system as much as we do, and especially in the current climate, but especially in postpartum. Like, we've totally fucked postpartum. No one owns postpartum women and health. Women just get chucked around, and then culturally we were never meant to do this on our own. And so for me, women, I was one of them, bum clencher. So many of us clench our bums. If we're clenching our bums, the hips are clenched, and that relays into the pelvic floor. And just to so really that emotional health and well-being. So I do a lot of one-on-one birth trauma debriefs, and I do a lot of one birth preparation chats with women all over the world. And I also do a lot of one-on-one counseling around core and pelvic floor issues, because so often it's what we make our symptoms mean. You know, someone gets a prolapse and they immediately go, I'm broken, I'm no longer attractive, my partner's going to cheat on me, I'm never going to be able to be a fun mum or keep up with my kids, I'm never going to go back to doing what I love. Now, all of that thought processes play out in our body, and our body holds so much story as well. And so when there's been birth trauma there, when there's been infertility issues, there is so much trauma held in that space. And when trauma is held, that there's tightness. And then you just have to really think about, as women, we don't grow up as young girls being excited and seeing what it's like to bleed. We grow up being, you know, often we don't want to do it. I remember being told about it and being like, Mommy, don't let that happen to me. Like, I don't want that to happen. Whereas culturally, for 60,000 years, it's been seen as this beautiful rite of passage where women come together, and it's this incredible, you know, there's so much ceremony around it. It's a really sacred time and space. We don't have that anymore. So many women take the pill to not bleed. That was all my girlfriends growing up, all my, you know, as a teenager, that's what we did. And so we've lost so much knowledge in that space, and we've lost really living in our pelvic bowls. We don't drop into our womb and ask our womb what it feels like. We don't connect with our cervix. There's a really cool a podcast, I think it's called the medical stories. There's a woman on Instagram called cervical wellness, and she talks all about her story with HPV, which I've had myself, and SIN too, and colposcopies, and how she healed her cervix. And she talks a lot about hanging out in our middle brain, which is, you know, what is you know, we're meant to rule with in labor and birth, and really dropping down into your womb and cervix. And if you really want to face yourself, you'll face your cervix, because the cervix is a face, and it has a mouth, which is our cervical os. So that podcast, it, you know, for some people it may feel really confronting and out there, but I really enjoyed a lot of it. So yeah, we don't hang out in our pelvic bowl. We live very sensually. I mean, yoga is all about that, dropping into your body and connecting with your body. But typically the majority of women, especially preconceptionally in that first pregnancy, they don't. And, you know, we talk about birth prep, you know, have a birth plan. You know, I prefer to use the word birth mapping, but it's all about the outcome and what we want the outcome to look like. We don't sit in a space of trust where it's like, you know, birth is that Danelle? Yes, Trudy, it's Danelle. Yeah. Danella or Danelle, yeah. Is you know, the ultimate birth prep is to sit in a space of trust where you're like, you know, and it's just like life, but birth is this incredible wave, and we don't know if we're going to get a barrel or it's going to pull us right down and turn us around and spit us out somewhere. The ultimate birth prep is to be able to trust that whatever it gives us is a beautiful offering of what we need, which, if you've had birth trauma, that statement can be extremely triggering. That we will come out on the other side and be even stronger than before. You know, like when I work with women who are having VBACs, it's like, or, you know, I did a beautiful birth debrief with someone yesterday who had all this guilt and anger around her second epic home birth because her first birth wasn't like that. And she was like, well, fuck, if I could do it the second time, why couldn't I do it the first? And it's like, you know, you got that birth because of what you experienced. You got that because of who you are, you know, and so long story, I got totally sidetracked, but emotional connection here is so pivotal. You know, emotional healing when you're looking at core and pelvic floor healing, and connection. You know, I work with women one-on-one, face-to-face, and it's like, get to know your labia. Like, you know, they haven't looked at their labia, they haven't looked at their vulva, and, you know, get to know your vulva more than your labia. I mean, sorry, I got confused then. Get to know your vulva. I mean, the fact that we call our vulva our vagina just really sums up where we're at in women's health, and that we just are so disconnected as a society around that whole space. And then we expect to birth a baby out of it. You know, the fact that we think our vaginas are this tight tunnel, your vagina is the shape of your baby's head. It's the shape of your pelvis, so perfectly made to bring a baby into it. but we think, you know, and porn's had a lot to do with that, and sex ed. We get taught that if you have sex, then you're going to make a baby the first time, and you'll probably get an STI too. And, you know, sex ed is not based around pleasure, and especially not pleasure for women, or even to get to know the epicness that we hold in that area. So a lot of what I do is really about connecting us back. And if there's trauma there, there can be a lot of disconnection and disassociation. And so a lot of it is creating safety to enable women to come back to that space and to get to know it again.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you was about that, because you spoke about internal examinations postnatally, which I think could be very beneficial for many women. But then I also feel that there's often this thing postnatally where we're scared to look at ourselves. We're scared to even touch ourselves. I mean, I remember I've just recently had my 5th, but even after some of the earlier births, just that fear of like, I don't really want to know what's going on down there because I know it's not like it was before kind of feeling. And then if you add into that previous trauma maybe, or, you know, discomfort with body and self-image, it's a lot. That's a lot. So I'm interested to ask you, one of the questions I wanted to ask was about internal examinations. And I know it's mostly physios that are doing that now to kind of give us a bit of a mapping about pelvic floor health postnatally. What are your thoughts on that? And you were saying that you've recently just started doing that work. So I'm very interested to see how you do that work.
Yeah, I think, you know, really good questions there, because I remember having my first baby and just being like, whose fucking vulva is that? Like, that's not mine. Like, where did my vulva go? And what is that? And then just being like, well, fuck, if I don't look at it, it's all right. Right. And that's so much of this work is about safety, and what we make things mean, and building that emotional connection and safety first, because so much of the reason we disconnect is our own story. And that is connected to the fact that many of us don't feel comfortable to feel, because we've been conditioned from a very young child to not feel and to not connect with our feelings. And that's because the majority of us were conditionally loved. We weren't unconditionally loved. And that comes down to, if you are happy and excited and proud, then I will love you. But if you are disappointed or angry or sad, then just go away, shut it down, take a deep breath. Like, we still do that. We're doing that now in parenting. Take a deep breath, take a deep breath. Anger needs movement. Like, you know, I say to my son, oh, I love it when you're angry. Yes. Tell me more. You know, or if I have a rupture with him, I'll be like, oh, how did it feel for you when mummy yelled at you? You know, none of us were asked that from our parents. And so a big part of this is safety and connection. So many women will take themselves off postnatally now. And this, you know, so many women don't know to do this. And then the ones that do, there's no reference point. They don't know what to expect. And so they've just had all this trauma in this area. And then it really depends, and you would know this, everyone knows this, it really depends on who you get, right? And how respectful they are around your story and your body. And, you know, when I do internal work, I'm invited into that woman's body and space, and I only go where she wants me to go. You know, I played with vaginas for 15 years and I had no idea about what they really were until I started doing this internal work. Because as a midwife, we go in, we feel the cervix, we come back out again. For sex, I've had a penis go in and come back out again. Like, it's not like, you know, the stuff we do now is like, oh, wow, there's a sacrum there, and there's a ischial spine there, and there's a tuberosity, and wow, there's your bladder under your pubic bone, and look how much space we've got. Isn't this incredible? And this side's tight and this side's not. And so when I do internal work, people come to me because they're ready, but it's really safe and slow and gentle. And often I won't do an internal session on the first session. I'll get to know the woman's story, and there might be a bit of external release, but there's nothing internal yet. And then, you know, when I meet a woman's body, I firstly put my hand on her vulva over some clothing and just get her to breathe and feel safe in that area. And then when the introitus opens and lets me in there, I'll go in. And I'm not, you know, I think this is the difference, right? Like, so many of us have had work in our vagina that's just very much like, right, stick something in, look at it, right? Like, it's very clinical and harsh and quick, and next patient, next patient, next patient. Even in birth, like, nothing is gentle. And oh, I'm just going to wait here until your body lets me in. And you can feel that in a woman's body. She goes, you know, the vagina is so fucking intuitive. It's like, fuck off, don't come in, or okay, I'm safe, you're allowed in. And so, you know, we don't spend a lot of time internally when we do this work, but there is so much safety around it. So it might be a 1 or 2 hour appointment. We're only internal for 15 minutes. But if you go and see a physio, it's very much part the labia. Let me look inside your vagina. I'm looking at it. And I very rarely look unless we're doing the work together, and diagnosing prolapse really, or testing the pelvic floor. So it's very clinical. So what I do is completely different. It's, where does the body want to take me? What does it want to tell me? You know, your body is a book, and every time we work with it, it opens a new page and it says, here's your story. And so the work I'm doing, and there's a couple of us around the country, but not many, that it's very respectful. It's very nurturing, it's nourishing. And if anything, it's about giving women the information about their bodies. I hate prolapse diagnosis. It makes no sense to me to be graded, because grading just plays into our good girl syndrome. And we think that, you know, we can get it down to a 0. And if we've been really naughty, it'll go into a grade 3 from a grade 2. The reality is, with a prolapse, it's constantly fluid and changing. And really the conversation needs to be around function over appearance. But so many women look, they can see it, so they're not better. It's like, well, you know, have you got symptoms? No. Then, you know, what is the issue here? Is it what it looks like? And then, okay, what does that mean? And let's work with that. And this is where I really see emotional health play out. I've had so many women that have felt fine. They go to the physio because I've talked about it and they think they need it. They get their 6-week checkup, and then all of a sudden they get diagnosed with something, and then they get symptoms. And I call it the head fuckery of prolapse, or the head fuckery of our symptoms. It's often, that is a beautiful example of how the mind can make us symptomatic. You know, healthcare providers will say, oh, it's all in your head. That's a horrible thing to say to a woman, because it's not, it's in your heart as well, and it's in your gut, and you don't feel like something's right. And so it's about, yeah, beautiful, it is in your head. So let's explore that. Let's see what it means, and let's take this experience that feels really debilitating and disempowering and turn it into an epic one. Like, I love my prolapse now. I love when I get symptomatic, because it's a beautiful sign that my body's done too much and I need to heal, or my mind is in imbalance and I need to heal that. But most women would think I'm batshit crazy for saying that, because it doesn't feel good to have a prolapse. But I haven't been symptomatic in months. But yeah, so, you know, really treating it holistically, and, you know, the work I do is all around release, and, you know, really helping you to understand your body more so you can work with it. But it's trauma stuff. And so, yeah, if you go to a physio, and this is why so many people come to me, they go to a physio, they get a diagnosis that they weren't expecting, or they've been going back to the physio and back, and they're doing their Kegels, which were, you know, named after a man and aren't the greatest thing in the world that we make them out to be, and they're not getting their symptoms relieved. Their things aren't getting better, and so they come to me, and then that's the unraveling of, well, what's actually going on for you. I really want to be conscious
I can definitely relate to the idea of, I mean, I'm thinking about pap smears. I remember my cervix is very far back, and every pap smear I've ever had, they can never find my cervix. So they're always kind of rummaging around looking for it. And I remember many times, especially as a younger woman, it doesn't bother me so much now. Like, I'll just go in and I'm kind of like, look, my cervix is really far back. You're probably going to need a long speculum. It's fine. But as a younger woman, just feeling like it's just rough. Like, the whole experience is rough. And I love the idea of the sensitivity and the gentleness and the sort of awareness of, you are actually entering into a woman's body, even if it's for a sort of medical procedure, and taking that in a way that has some sensitivity to it. That's beautiful.
The biggest thing around it is giving a woman a voice, right? And so I'll say to her, how does this feel? What does this feel like? Tell me, like, this shouldn't hurt. Like, the work I do shouldn't hurt. And so if it does, it becomes this incredible thing where a woman gets a voice over that area again. Because so often when we've had this internal work, we haven't had a voice, or we haven't felt like we've had one. And sometimes when we do use our voice, it's not respected. You know, so much birth trauma is around vaginal examinations, and examiners not stopping when they have been asked to, and things like that, and episiotomy. So I just want to acknowledge, I probably sound like I'm physio bashing, and I'm really not. They have an incredible place and they do a lot of great work, and lots of women have a lot of success with physios. But we're really now seeing, and research is always 20 years behind practice, but we're really now seeing that shift into a more holistic approach, and the fact that it can be tightness that's causing our issues too. But yeah, when a woman tells me her story, I'm constantly like, thank you, and like, wow, look how incredible your body is, it's just released and opened, and all that language that gives women confidence in themselves again. Like, I've got so many stories. I could talk for an hour about the shit that's been said to me around my pelvic bowl, like, oh, your cervix is just dying to get cancer. Like, that was said to me by a doctor once after all these sin twos. Like, and the more you talk about that with women, the more they're like, yeah, this was said to me. And, like the fact your cervix is far back, so many women would interpret that as there's something wrong with me, and it's like, no, we're all incredibly different. And our body is super responsive when we're kind to it. And that involves emotional kindness from ourselves too. But the majority of us, as a culture, don't know the language of self-compassion.
Let's jump back just a touch, because I'm interested to hear your opinion. I guess this is a two-part question. First of all, I'm interested to hear what you think about Kegels. I've got an idea from what you just said, but I'd love a bit more of your thoughts on that, because that's sort of the main, when people think pelvic floor, I think that's the main association that a lot of women have, particularly postnatally, the Kegel exercises. And then I also wanted to ask you what your thoughts are about the machines that we can get that tone the pelvic floor, internal electric machines. I'd love some feedback on those. And also, I've been seeing recently a bit of stuff online about weights, the idea of, and I think this is quite an ancient practice too, internally putting weights into the vagina and using that as a way of, I'm just interested in your thoughts about all of those types of things.
Okay. So typically, if we look at Kegels, the majority of women will do them whilst doing something else. So there's no connection to that space. And they'll do them at traffic lights or while brushing their teeth. They're not in a great alignment. They're often sitting. The pelvic floor does not like sitting. It's in a shortened space in that time, like sitting in a car. And so we're not giving the muscles and connective tissue the ability to have full range of movement or motion. Okay, there's a lot to this. A lot of women will just contract, and so they don't focus because they're so focused on strengthening and having strength. I don't talk about pelvic floor strength. I talk about balance. We need the pelvic floor to contract when it's needed, to lengthen when it's needed, right? So during birth, and we think the pelvic floor sits like in this shape, but it actually sits in that shape on a live human. So many of our like, what do you call them, models, and what we know and see are often based on dead people and dead tissue. But what we know about the pelvic floor, what we think is like it's more this shaped, and then like it comes down and up, right? And so during labor, the pelvic floor does exactly what it does during orgasm, which is, I always talk about orgasm being the most incredible birth prep we can do. So the pelvic floor will kind of come up and hang around the ischial spines. And so we'll see this connection with baby, typically around that like active labor mark. So like 6 centimeters if you're just going by the cervix. And so the strength of the pelvic floor is really important in labor because it is a guide for the head and provides resistance for the baby to rotate its head around, right? Another really important factor in this is the psoas, which being yogis, you'll all love, but there is beautiful theory around the fact that if the psoas is too tight, the psoas needs that strength to kind of guide baby and say, you're going the right way, keep going. But if it's too tight, the baby's like, oh, which way do I go? And that's, we often see with tight psoas, those babies in those presentations that make it harder for the cervix to dilate and for the head to come down into the pelvis, which is where so many women end up with intervention because we stick them on a clock in our system. We stick them on a clock to perform. So the thinking is that the pelvic floor kind of hangs around here, the ischial spines. It provides beautiful strength to help the baby to rotate, and then it starts to lengthen. And then as it lengthens out fully, the baby's head comes down. pushes down on that pelvic floor, stimulates the clitoris, which is why forward leaning positions are so important during birth. And we get what's called the fetal ejection reflex, right? So what we did in birth is we really fucked it up when we defined the stages of labor, because we defined the stages of labor by what the cervix is doing. And so we created a pushing phase when actually there is already a pushing phase that's physiological. It's called the fetal ejection reflex, right? And most women don't know about it. Most women don't have it. Most care providers don't facilitate it. And so women get really confused in labor with the urge to push, and they start to push, or they're told, oh, you're 10 centimeters, so you can start pushing now, but they've got no urge. And so that's where the coach pushing happens, which is where the birth can ruin us, because we're straining and we're pushing with our pelvic floor. Pelvic floor doesn't push the baby out. It sits underneath the baby's head. The uterus is a muscle that pushes the baby out. But when you strain to push, you use all these muscles that aren't really designed or needed, right? So the exact.
Can I just ask you a question there, just on that? Sorry. So if a woman was having a lot of pain relief or having an epidural or something like that, would it be harder for her to then isolate in terms of that pushing, the difference between using the uterus and using the pelvic floor muscles? It becomes much more difficult to know what you're doing, right? You can't do it.
If we truly trusted birth, and if a woman and baby are well and we threw out the clock, we would just allow the uterus to keep doing what it's doing, which is push the baby down. So it blows my mind, because in epidurals now we give what's called passive descent, which is where we leave women to have an hour for the uterus to bring baby down, so she has a more successful or a higher chance of pushing her baby out. But then we start coach pushing. Coach pushing has now been scientifically proven to increase the time it takes to push your baby out and increase fetal distress. So we shouldn't be doing it, but we're going to, probably for a good 20 years or more, because anyway, I could get on my horse about that for years, but I'm not. So I'm coming back to why Kegels, why I don't love Kegels. So we need, as like with all muscles, balance. We need a muscle that can contract and lengthen, but the key, and this is like the philosophy of all my programming, is coordination, right? And so often that is what we lack. So I do not see any point squeezing to bring back function of a muscle. So if you came to me and said, I want stronger arms, as you know, those of you that are yoga trainers, would you get someone to sit there and just squeeze and release? No, you'd get them to use their body in really functional ways. And so for me, people are like, oh, I've been doing my Kegels 10 times, holding, squeezing, It's like, okay, well, how have you been moving throughout the rest of your day? Because we put more pressure on the pelvic floor going from sitting to standing than we do doing things like lifting weights, right? Now, you think about what we do with our babies as well. Our body has been completely stretched in pregnancy and birth, and then in postpartum, we're not nourished, we're not supported, we're expected to look after our babies on our own, and our culture has an obsession with taking babies away from our body. Most cultures keep babies nice and close to them. We put babies in cots, in prams, in bouncers, in car seats, in baths, and we're constantly taking a really heavy weight and we're moving it away from our core. Now, anyone that has any exercise physiology understands that that's incredibly hard for the core. So if the strength isn't there, what we do is we hold our breath to increase our intra-abdominal pressure, and when we do that, we bear down on our pelvic floor and we push out through our core, and we get this straining. And so many women postpartum end up with diastasis recti or prolapse or issues, and it's because we're not functionally moving, where we don't have the strength for the exercises we're doing, but we've been doing our Kegels. It's like there's no point doing them for 10 minutes a day if for the other 18 hours you're awake, you're working against your body. And so for me, it's about learning about that whole core unit and the synergy of it. And so if you come to me with pelvic floor issues, the first place I start with is the diaphragm. Are you connecting to your diaphragm? How do you breathe, right? What is happening when you breathe? Where does that breath go? what is that diaphragm? The diaphragm is often really constricted postpartum. So it might be expanding at the front, but there might be no movement at the back or the sides. I went to yoga for years, and people were always like, breathe into your back, the breath, the breath. It's so amazing. I'd be like, what the fuck? I know how to breathe. And how do I breathe into my back? Like, I never understood it. And I think that's a really big thing. Like, women need information. They need to understand, this is what's happening. This is how you can do this. So, I start with the diaphragm, then we work down and understand the deep core, because most of us think that contracting our core is pulling our belly button into our spine. When women do that, they tend to do it on an inhale. Research supports wrapping rather than drawing in. And so they draw in around that spine. And when they do that, they often do it on an inhale. And again, they bear down on the pelvic floor, because the torso is everything is connected and it's a pressurized unit. So if you're pulling something in, everything that space has got to go up and down, which is why, so with core and floor, we contract on an exhale as the body naturally comes back together, and we expand on an inhale, and we exhale on the effort. So I use the 3 E's: exhale, engage, exercise. So really engaging and using that contraction to make us move. So for me, it's not about mindlessly squeezing a muscle. You've got to squeeze it, you've got to release it, and you've got to bring it with you. So like I teach women to be able to learn how to jump again, you got to start with calf raises and really bring that pelvic floor up. So it's about bringing pelvic floor connection into exercise and functional movement. That is so much better than just sitting there squeezing a muscle at a traffic light. But also understanding your pelvic floor. So there's no point contracting it if it's tight. You've got to actually lengthen it and stretch it and give it space, and then build strength. And a big misconception in our society is that if muscles are tight, they must be strong. So women don't realize they can have tightness and weakness. And so they're like, oh, my pelvic floor is tight, so I don't need to contract it. It's like, oh no, it's actually not in balance and it's not working correctly. And so we need to bring back balance, and that we got to lengthen before we strengthen, is a big thing that I always say. So that's kind of my philosophy on Kegels. It's if we wanted to strengthen any other muscle group, we work with it holistically. I don't just stand there and squeeze my bum. I do squats. Squats are incredible birth prep and incredible for pelvic floor because they lengthen and contract it. In terms of, so there's lots of different things that people will offer around pelvic floor. Many women struggle to connect to the muscle. So we know that 51% of people who are told to do their pelvic floor exercises won't be doing them correctly. And that's where that feedback from a physio is great. Ultrasound can really show to help people to connect. And those machines, they're like TENS machines. They give like little electrode currents. They can be really great to help wake the muscle up. From a holistic point of view, I'm like, why? Why is there no connection? Because the body is incredibly intuitive and it will always work from a state of protection. And so if there's story there, the body's not going to go there. And so we're forcing it to do something that it's not yet ready to do. So for me, I would want to work with a woman emotionally first, and then try and see if that connection comes with safety. But so often, women are so keen to get fixed, and so they'll do something like that and it will work, but it's not a long-term solution. So yeah, the electrodes can be really great for people that don't have that connection there. The yoni eggs, there's a lot of beautiful holistic people that I work with that really love them. I'm not well researched in them. Physiologically, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we would put a weight into that area. But then if we think about what we do with muscles and adding weights, then that works. I always say that it's got to work for you. So it's the same with pessaries and estrogen cream that people get recommended. If it feels great, awesome. Like, we're all so different. And so if it works for you, great, do it. If your intuition's going, I don't want to do this, I don't want to buy this thing and stick this thing in my vagina, don't. And it might be that you don't want to do it now, and then in 3 years' time you might revisit it and go, oh, actually I'd be prepared to do that now. And you try it, and if it works for you, awesome. And if it doesn't, awesome. Now you know, and you won't use it again. I'm not a hard and fast rule person, because I've seen some things work for some people and others not. It's really, where are you at? I say over and over again, do you? do you. And so it's got to be doing you at that point of your life. And so, yeah, for many women, estrogen cream doesn't feel good because they're breastfeeding, you know, and they understand that their body doesn't have estrogen for a reason. So it doesn't make sense to them that they would put it into their vaginas. And so this is like a thing that people use for prolapse. Whereas other people are really keen for it. Often that's the thing. Like if you think it's going to work and you believe in it, then often it will work really well for you. So yeah, those machines like the PeriFits that people use, it's about feedback, and often people don't want to stick their fingers in their vaginas and get that feedback, but you know, it's just people making money really by making these machines, and sometimes they will really help people, but you can do it with your own body. You can do it by looking and touching your body and getting that connection. But a lot of what I do and I believe in takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of commitment, and women with young babies often don't have that. And as a society, we love our quick fixes. You know, you would see people that come to the first, you know, practice of yoga, and then what they look like 12 months down the track. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a beautiful process and journey. And I love that. But as a culture, we really struggle with that a lot of the time. So I sell core and floor restore programs as 8-week programs, but I'm very honest that it's lifelong. And, you know, and I think when we're really honest with women, especially around symptoms, for me, it's about managing your symptoms and knowing that they probably will come back around periods and perimenopause and menopause. And it's about having that knowledge and trust, but also having your story right, that you're not broken, that this is a phase and you can work through it and you can manage it and you can feel better. Did that answer? I feel like there was a third question there though.
Yeah, no, that was it. That's amazing. Thank you. It was the machines, but then also the idea of the yoni eggs or the weights. And I love this perspective of each individual person, you know, going on their own journey, and it's going to be different. It's going to look different for everyone. There's no one size fits all.
And there's no right or wrong. It's just about, you know, figuring out what feels good for you, but that can be really full on and time consuming. But I'm an academic. I've got published research and I love academia, but it's so limited in so much of this because it's really hard to research that. And so I'm becoming more and more what people would, you know, say flowery, but, you know, all that really matters is you and how you feel and your story at the end of the day. And, you know, where you are on your deathbed, if you're like, oh, well, that was awesome that I did that. And I love that I did that. And so much of what I do is really about enabling people to use their voice again, and have the trust and confidence to please themselves, not everybody else, because so many of us are good girls and people pleasers. And so we'll do as we're told. And, you know, I see that a lot. People like, they'll ring me and, oh, you know, I've been to the physio 5 times and every time I go, she tells me to get a pessary. And so I feel like now I need one. And then, you know, that breaking down of, you know, and so it's like, well, how does this sit for you? And yeah, you can say no, and you can say, oh, I'm not willing to have this conversation again. You know, really setting boundaries around the care you receive, which so many of us don't do. We're just so grateful to get what we're given, and then we get on with it. Whereas, you know, saying I'm not actually willing for you to do an internal assessment today, or I don't want, you can have a look at my prolapse, but please don't tell me the grade. You know, we don't take that voice or that stance so often. So that's a big thing that I kind of come from too, because when we have that confidence and that voice for our body, and we start giving ourselves that love and pleasing ourselves, so much shifts and moves.
Well, this is where the yoga practice for me is so powerful. And part of what this training, Yoga of Birth, is all about is really facilitating women's own journey and experience of themselves. Like a lot of what you've spoken about today is about the disconnect that so many women have with their own bodies. And I think there's so many different reasons for that. Some of them are to do with the way that medical professionals and medical institutions interact with us, for sure. And then there's much bigger picture things like, you know, the patriarchy and colonialism, and it goes on and on. But some of it is also that we're just not educated or supported or nurtured in being in relationship with our own bodies, exactly as you've said. And so I feel that the yoga class, I really feel this is an incredible opportunity for women to come into presence with themselves even if only for a few breaths, even if only for a few moments. And even if coming into relationship with self actually feels quite scary and feels quite overwhelming and isn't comfortable, because that's the other thing, is that we're very biased in our culture towards it needs to feel good, right? I want it to feel good. And if it doesn't feel good, then somehow, you want your students to come to the yoga class and leave feeling good. Well, that's not necessarily what's going to happen in a class that actually is really facilitating true coming into relationship with self. Ultimately, the feeling good will come later, but there might be some exploration or some discomfort or some moments of feeling very confronted, and that's part of the process too, being able to sit in that discomfort. One of my teachers, he's actually a male teacher, but I think he puts it very well. He says that yoga is the process of putting ourselves through somewhat stressful situations physically, so that we can learn to deal with stress in a way that doesn't shut us down or contract us or leave us feeling like we've been violated in some way. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I did want to ask you one thing, B, because you said at the beginning, before we started recording, you said a lot of what I teach conflicts with yoga, and that kind of piqued my interest. So I'd love you to speak to that a little bit, like because a lot of the people that will listen to the recording of this session are yoga teachers. Where are we going wrong?
I don't think you're going wrong at all. I just know that a lot of people who come to my programs will say that the breath is different. So I often teach, so on yoga, like some of it is the same, some of it will be the same for a certain movement, but other movements it won't be. And so I think it can be a bit conflicting for people that have done a lot of yoga. And so it's I address it in my frequently asked questions, because I get it a lot. It's like, oh, this is the opposite breath of what I do in yoga. And what I've found is that when people add what I call the lift and wrap into their yoga practice, the poses feel so much more stronger and supported. So it would really be a really, breakdown of specific exercises and movements. But it's, for me, it's that real exhale and contraction, engagement and effort on the exhale. And so for sometimes when we inhale, because you inhale and lengthen,
it depends. There's different schools of thought within yoga as well. So I think Pilates has done, I guess I feel like about Pilates, like you do about physio, that it does a lot of good, but there's also some stuff in there that isn't so great. My personal opinion about contraction on the inhale and then release on the exhale, or vice versa, is actually it depends a lot on what's going on for the individual woman. I think it can vary. So it's a little bit like what we do with the diaphragm. What we find with the breath is that normally what we're looking to happen in the human body is that when we inhale, the diaphragm drops, and when we exhale, the diaphragm lifts to force the air out of the body, right? Very simple mechanics of respiration. When someone's in a very heavy stress response, like having a panic attack or really overwhelmed and not in a kind of dysfunctional place, let's say, what will happen with the diaphragm is it actually starts to reverse its action. And so the inhale starts to happen in conflict with the diaphragm lifting, and it creates a kind of problem, let's say, with the breath, which is one that can often lead then to panic attacks and that type of thing. And I'm sure you've seen this in labor, B, when women are laboring and really going into a panic state. I think that's very, very closely linked with this story around contract on the inhale and release on the exhale. So what I try to teach is looking at an individual woman's situation and how malleable, and it's exactly what you said before, exactly the same, that the diaphragm is the beginning of the story, and then the pelvic floor is kind of connected to that. Depending on what's happening with the diaphragm, depending on what's happening with the breath, will then impact what's happening with pelvic floor, will then impact whether we contract or release. So it's, in other words, it's a complex and quite nuanced story. Generally what we do teach is on the inhalation is to let go, and on the exhalation is to contract. On the inhalation is to contract. I got that the wrong way around. And on the exhalation is to release and let go. That's generally what we teach.
Yes.
So inhale, draw in and up. Exhale,
inhale, let go.
Yeah, so
Exhale,
that's opposite. That's opposite
yeah.
to what we generally teach, but there
Yeah.
are definitely times where I would teach what you're describing, and particularly when there's trauma, when the diaphragm is locked up, when the pelvic floor is locked up, then we do that. We actually call it reverse breathing. We do that practice where we flip the breathing around to really what it does is it releases a trauma response. I think the answer is it's complex, and there's probably a whole training in there somewhere. Like it's absolutely fascinating.
And it's, you know, some women, when they wrap their core, they'll bear down on their pelvic floor, even though they think they're lifting it. And so often what they think they're doing with their body, they're not. And so it's so individual. But I guess for me, you know, having a program, which is really daunting when you know how individual people are, but it's around that, getting the body to do what it's designed to do and trying to bring back that body into homeostasis. So as we inhale, and so we start really slowly with just that breath, and then we connect with the vulva and the anus and try and see if that inhale is there in the pelvic floor. And so we get because when you inhale, the pelvic floor should expand, and you should be able to feel that, just like you can feel your belly come out. So I don't do belly breathing, but do a lot of dropping that belly into the pelvic bowl, inhale, and then on the exhale, as the body naturally rebounds, working with that. And so that's the whole foundation of core and floor, and then adding exercise into that to create the coordination and get the body doing, because that's so often what happens, right? When we sneeze, the body should contract, but it doesn't, it bears down. And so much of what I'm doing is trying to get that body to work back the way it was designed to, so that then it can function correctly in everything that we do, from coughing to sneezing to picking up our children, to picking up the washing basket. So that's where it's conflicting.
I mean, to me, it's fascinating. I definitely intend to do your program. I'm really interested in it, and I want to learn more, because I think that the knowledge that you're sharing is just so powerful. And I will absolutely make sure that everyone who's doing this Yoga of Birth program has access to finding out more about your teaching, because I think I just always come back to, it's exactly what you said. There is no one size fits all answer. It's going to be for each person their own journey and their own exploration, and each moment is different. You know, when I look back through the births that I've had and the recovery, the postnatal recoveries that I've had, each one of them has been its own journey. My body's been different. My mentality has been different. It's never the same, even with the same human body, you know, it's never the same. So for each individual person,
and I always say my program's not going to work for everyone. Like, you know, I don't sell hard and fast. I don't use a lot of marketing stuff. It's like, yeah, it might work for you if you do, you know, it like this and it feels good, but really it's about what feels good for us. And, you know, coming back to, you know, we talk so much about feeling comfortable with the uncomfortable. So I do a lot of women's coaching, and we do a lot around mum rage and mum guilt and being able to feel things and self-care and boundaries. I do a whole lot of that. It's like another thing that I do, and a lot of it is providing the space for people to feel. So what I think, whilst, you know, what you're saying is what you love about yoga is that they might not enjoy it. I think, you know, in this work, we have a really big responsibility to, I guess, hold that space for people and allow them to work through what they're working through. And often that is just creating a safe space that they're able to come back to. But I know for me in my work, sometimes what I've done really triggers people and then they never come back. And that's a part of it too, I guess. But yeah, just knowing how much women are not held in postpartum, the most incredible thing we can give women is the feeling of being held and nourished. It's just, yeah, so, and just in the words we use or the touch we give or the you know, little subtle comments like, wow, look at your body and how, you know, it's healing. Like, you know, to hear that is like, oh, really? You think it's healing? Oh, thanks. Like, you know, just something like that. So yeah,
beautiful. We've got just a couple of minutes and I'd really like to open up if there's any questions. Does anybody who's here have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask, or feel free to write in the chat if that's easier for you. Anna.
Hi, Katie. Hi, Bernadette. Thank you so much. So interesting. Because all this is quite new for me, and I think you touch a little bit, and I'm currently pregnant. You mentioned something about the push stage, like during birth. I don't know if you can refer me to a further place where I can find more information. I just found it fascinating, and I'm sure there is a lot of it.
So I did, for anyone that is pregnant, I did free antenatal classes during COVID. They've been watched like 70,000 times now. So they're available on my website. They're free and they're Auslan interpreted. So just as a resource to give people that you know that are pregnant, they are there. And then I've done some really, thanks Pippa. I've done some really cool stuff on Instagram. So I've done an emotional preparing for birth. It was about a 45-minute video on Insta. Just find it so you can see it, and that goes all around like what are your fears and all that stuff. So if you go to the play, so I'm Core and Floor Restore, is it going to come up? It's that video there. So if you go to the play button right across, it's called How to Mentally Prepare for Your Birth. So that's
I'll make sure that's in the notes. I'll get that in the notes for everyone.
Yeah, cool. And then heaps of my reels. So I do like how to map your pelvis. I'll be doing one this week on like our vaginas aren't tiny, but I've done heaps around pushing. But basically your uterus is a muscle and it contracts and works like a plunger and brings your baby down. And if we just, I've got been at so many births where women just and you never actually hear them push. They literally breathe their baby out because the body does the work. It takes a fair bit of support and strength to be able to do that. I haven't done it. Both times I've just roared and spat my babies out. But really, if we look at the biomechanics of birth, that's what it's designed to do. So knowing the difference, and especially for midwives, knowing the difference between pressure, urge to push, and fetal ejection reflex are huge, because the urge to push, I kind of explain it. The urge to push is like nausea, like there's an urge to vomit, but you're not yet vomiting. The fetal ejection reflex is the reflex, it's the vomiting. And so, that's how I kind of explain it. Does that make sense, Anna? Is there anything? So head to my Instagrams, heaps of free stuff on there. I do lots. I try and do a lot of things for free because I just believe this knowledge should be out there, but I have to feed my kids, so.
No, that's great. Thank you. I will definitely look more. I already found your antenatal classes online as well. That's great.
Epic. Well, wishing you an epic birth and postpartum. I think, Trudy, have you got a question? Are you a midwife, Trudy?
I'm a doula.
You've just got that like being about you. I'm like, you're at birth.
Thank you. So hi, lovely to meet you.
Hi, lovely to
my
meet you.
Question, Bernadette, is a lot of my work is quite like I do visualizations prenatally, and something that came through with me for myself working with women was this whole essence of like, so when we're conceiving and we conceive and early in birth, we kind of like a flower we close and we're holding everything in. And then it got to me to work with people about starting to connect into opening that flower, and the opening, to me, it's like the pelvic bowl. When would be like a safe time? I kind of have seen it more in third trimester. So when would you kind of see that as
around
a safe
34
time?
weeks is a really cool time to start really focusing on lengthening and opening. 34 to 36, and then that perineal, we go on and on about perineal massage, but it's more about pelvic bowl exploration. Like the baby's got to do more than get past the pelvic floor. So, and so often what holds us up is tightness much higher up. So that expansion from that time at around 34, 36 weeks. And so often you see it in women because their body starts to do it and they end up with really bad pelvic girdle pain and things like that. When there is an imbalance, you'll know that the body is actually just starting that process. I've had pelvic girdle pain twice, and whilst it's extremely debilitating, I love it for birth because it's like, that your pelvis is doing beautiful work already and knows how to open, there's a lot of space. Like I typically see women who've had pelvic girdle pain, they birth really well because that pelvis, there's so much length and space in it. I think another thing that's really important to know too around lengthening is that our bones are soft. We think that our bones are really hard because of all the models that we have, but just really understanding how soft and the movement that our bones have. So when you're getting women to really expand that space, giving them the education around how beautiful the bones can move and open, and same with the baby's head bones, you know, they'll mold if they need to. So yeah, not just muscle or connective tissue, that the bones can really, really move and stretch too. Like just they have that ability to open because of the connective tissue. But, you know, I think women think this is my pelvis and it's fixed. And it's like, nah, it does really cool stuff. So yeah.
Because I'm also like a massage therapist, and I'm currently doing Katie's training with the birth yoga and Ayurvedic goddess, and just loving it's like being in a lolly shop and you're training today. I'm like, oh my gosh, like bring this in. So so it's like a lot of the time they come in for the prenatal massage, and so it's a beautiful opportunity to integrate the visualization space as well. So from my perspective, kind of in keeping them safe, I was like, okay, well, at what point do we start going in on a visualization level? So thank you.
I wouldn't do any internal release stuff until around that 34-week mark, unless it was really necessary. The body does it on its own. What we're trying to do is just help facilitate that as well. I think
I'm very aware of your time, B. So let's just take this one last question from Pippa, and then I'll let you go. She's asking about after a failure to progress in the first birth, moving into a second birth. What are your thoughts on that?
So can you do anything to encourage the cervix thinning, dilating second birth? And does that correlate to tight pelvic floor, mentally not letting go? So there's many reasons why the cervix doesn't feel safe enough to open. And sometimes it's a mechanical reason. Sometimes it's simply like a head on the cervix. And so it's a pressure thing. So if we talk about posterior babies, anterior babies, and you can do this with your head, right? With your hand. If you make a cervix with your hand and you stick it on the back, so you're going to stick this part of your hand on the back of your head. If you stick it there, it meets with your occiput really beautifully. But if you then stick your hand there, you'll feel the difference. Feel free to do it. There's a lot of space there. And so this is what a posterior baby presents with. And so it doesn't connect with the cervix as much, and so that we get a slower labor and a cervix that doesn't open as much or as quickly, or it doesn't open in a particular area. So a baby that presents like, you know, with its head tilted, you know, it's going to open the cervix on this side, but there's nothing to push down and open it on that side, right? So very much the position of the baby affects what the cervix does. Likewise, the you know, the feeling of the body and the mind will hold baby in there too. So for me, my first baby came out with a massive 6 centimeter mark on its head, and I had just sat at 6 centimeters telling myself I was failing for hours. I didn't have a midwife there. I was all on my own, and then I remember the point in my labor where I surrendered and I just let go, and I pushed a baby out very quickly after that. The cervix doesn't dilate the way we think it does. It doesn't go 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters. You know, it's this very fluid thing that kind of like ripples and moves and opens. And so for me, working with someone like that, I'd want to know externally and internally where the body's holding tension. So is it the psoas? Is it the piriformis or the obturator? What's the pelvic floor doing? Sometimes, I mean, the pelvic floor again is getting a lot of blame for this in birth, that it's the pelvic floor is too tight. I do see that if the resistance is too much and that baby is unable to move. But again, there's all of this, right? So like what surrounds the baby? There are 36 muscles that attach to the pelvis. There's a lot around there. And so what are the core muscles doing? What are the back muscles doing? And, you know, where do you hold your tension? So this is why we talk about women to soften and open and let go, but so many women don't understand what that means. They hear the words, but they don't know what it feels like in their body. They try to do it because they're getting told to, but they don't truly understand it at a really deep level. And I think a part of it, you know, I was a midwife for 10 years before I had my first baby, and I didn't really get it until I'd done it myself either. I was like, that's what surrendering is like. And now I've had the opportunity to practice it a lot in motherhood. I really understand it, but so many of us don't. And then when we go in with birth maps or birth plans, and we have this weighted agenda of what birth should look like and feel like, that can really mess with us too. So in terms of, can you do anything to encourage the cervix thinning? Yeah, safety. So who do you feel safe with? You know, like people always like, oh, can you recommend a doula? No, find one that's right for you. Like, you know, the person I need to look after me in birth, and that would have changed with every birth. Like that first birth, I really needed someone who was an older woman, who was really soft, who I just wanted to cuddle into and be nurtured by. And, you know, I didn't get that from my mom. And so that's what I feel like I really needed in vulnerability. I wouldn't have been able to identify that then, but you know, I really talk with them. And if you go to someone and they make you go, oh, then they're the right person for you. How many women get that in birth though? Fuck all. So yeah, if we want to talk about how do we make the cervix thin and dilate, it's attacking your senses to make them feel safe. I'm not attacking them, creating safety around your senses. So it's everything you see, touch, taste, feel, hear, and the flow and effect with your body. So where you birth, who you birth with, and your inner dialogue. And for so many of us, our inner dialogue is you're failing, you're not doing this right, or you have to make these people happy. So it's and I talk about that in my how to mentally prepare for birth, but a lot of it is, what are your themes, or what is your emotional love language? How do you talk to yourself? Because that will play out in labor a lot. And so, you know, I really see a role as a doula as somebody who identifies that you're not feeling safe and is able to bring you back into safety. That is a doula or a midwife. That's true midwifery. Being a midwife means with women, but most midwives don't get to practice midwifery. They're practicing obstetric nursing. And so, you know, it's, if you are really intuitive and good at what you do, you'll go, that woman's feeling scared. And I know her fears because we've talked about them, and I'm going to now do this to bring her back into safety. So yeah, I remember my first midwife girlfriend was scary. What? Unmute if you want, Trudy. I've actually got time. I had a cancellation. So
I remember my first son. I was like 3 days. I was 18, 3 days labor, cesarean. You know, he was in a humid crib, like, and this lady, she comes in and she's coming and she was like Sergeant General, you know, but I guess I was quite sort of like not confident and safe in myself, and like girlfriend was scary. Like, it was kind of like, are you ready to go? Get up. Yep. You know,
yeah.
There was, but
when I do birth debriefs, sometimes it's, you know, oh, my baby didn't come out of my vagina. There's a lot of disappointment around that. But what often holds charge for people is how they were treated, how they were spoken to, how they felt and how they interpreted it. And yeah, there are so many people that, you know, because you are powerful if you're a medical professional in our world, because we're looked up to. And you know, I always say people,
sorry, yeah, no, it's also I think I just want to hold a highlighter over what you just said for doula work, because so many of the people in this space are doulas. And B, you just said identifying when a woman doesn't feel safe and bringing her back to safety as the role of the doula. And I just think that's so beautiful. I just want to pause on that for a second, because for me, that just absolutely encapsulates the role of the doula. That's incredible. I was just going to chip in and say, it's very interesting though in the birthing space, because actually sometimes what a woman needs is also loving and supportive, strong energy, you know, like it's not always just, oh, go with the flow and soft and gentle. And you know, I feel like in my last birth with Leela, for example, there was a little bit too much of that very soft, gentle kind of permissive, let's say, energy, like everything's okay. And actually what I needed was some dynamic, like, you can do this, you've got this, let's work on this together, like some fighting talk, you know. So I think the skill in the midwife and the doula is in knowing when to do, how to do that dance.
I always say I never get to be the midwife I want to be. I have to be the midwife she needs me to be, because the midwife I want to be is where I sit there with total trust in her, and she sits in total trust with herself, and we just hang back and watch a baby being born, right? Because I'm fucking lazy. Like, yeah, let's do it. Birth is really boring when everyone trusts it, but typically, like, and that's when I'm like, identifying what you need is key, because I am that I'm, you know, I'll never forget, I was a new grad, I was working in Darwin, and I was looking after this really young woman having a baby. She was 16, and she was there with her mom and her sisters and her aunties, and I was like, just breathe, trust your body, just do what your body's telling you to do. And then the matriarch came in, you know, the one woman that I hated working with, Deb, you never forget them. And she marched in and she was like, hold your breath and bear down and push. That baby came out like that. And that was a huge, and afterwards she was like, you weren't telling me what to do. Like, I, you know, basically it was like, I didn't feel safe with you. I needed, and she was like, oh, like she was totally in love with this horrendous woman that I hated. And I was like, how could you like her and not me? You know, as this young 20-year-old that had never had babies. And, you know, really, I was a new grad, and I was coming at birth with what I wanted it to look like. I was coming at birth with an agenda. And, you know, that's the only mistake I make in my career now, is when I don't give the woman or don't know her enough. And this is why I hate fragmented care. I hate turning up and looking after a woman when she's 7 centimeters and trying to get to know her. Like, it's why I value doulas so damn much in our current system, because you're so needed, because you are that safety. But yeah, you have to be what the woman needs. And so some births, it looks like me going, push, 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 even though I fucking hate doing it, because it's working. And it's like, we got to get this baby out, because they're going to come in and do an instrumental or take you for a Caesar. And afterwards I'm like, oh, that was shit. And they're like, that was the most amazing birth, I'm so grateful. And then other births, like, I remember I was 36 weeks pregnant and I gave birth at 36. I gave birth a couple of days after this birth. It was the last birth I did before I had my baby, my first baby. And this woman, she didn't want her husband there, so she told him to go home to look after the dogs. She had an epidural. She was watching a fishing show, and she was just eyes on this TV watching a fishing show as she pushed her baby out. It was just her and I in the room, and it was so disconnected. And afterwards she was like, that was exactly what I wanted, thank you so much, that was awesome. And I just left going, oh, like, you know, that was the most horrific birth I've ever been at. And so, you know, I think as care providers, really, it's never about what we want, it's always what they want. But that can be hard if you don't know the woman. I mean, if you're a doula, you're going to know her. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Bea. This has been such an enriching session. I'm just so grateful for your time and for you being here. I've made so many notes. I've learned a lot. I'd love to have you back again at some point. So let's talk about that. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that we can discuss and chat about. But for now, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, it's been really, really helpful.
Yeah, I never really answered your first question of who I was, but I do that all the time. I just spit out information. So I hope it made sense.
We can link people up to your website and all your resources, so they'll be able to get lots more from you. Thanks, Bea. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Oh, Leela's saying goodbye.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for what you do and for being in this space with women, because it's so important. So thank you for all you do.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.